All right, I'm going to show you guys how I typically mix drums. I'm going to try to focus on frequencies and where certain things will sit and what frequencies can kind of be problems. Let's just get started. I have a kick, a snare, two toms, a hi-hat, a pair of overheads, china, hall, and room. And the overheads is going to have some bleed from the other instruments as like a real drum kit would. And if you're curious, I'm using my own Proclamation drum library. It's a library I made for Kontakt 5. You can check it out in the description. But I have all of those tracks going to this drum aux, and then I have another aux that I'm gonna add a reverb on later. So let's get started with a kick. I'm just gonna solo the kick, and we can listen to it. And what I would advise is just listen for what you like and what you don't like, and focus. Try to figure out what you don't like so that you can cut that certain frequency. So I'm noticing it's kind of like hum in the low end. It's kind of resonance. First of all, I'm gonna always throw a little high pass filter. This will clean up your master a lot. This will keep a lot of mud out, and it'll give you some more headroom. So I always throw this on here. Now we're gonna want to find this little resonating note. See if we can find it. All right, now another frequency I don't like in my drum shells, and what I mean by that, what I should say is the kick and the toms is a frequency around between 100 and 150. It's usually around 120. I don't like that. Let's find that and then just cut that out. It's usually it's in most kicks and toms that I've mixed. All right, awesome. That sounds cool. I'm gonna go ahead and throw a compressor on here, get a little bit more gain. All right, and a compressor for your drums, definitely listen to the attack and release and how that's gonna affect your sound. The slower the attack is, which means like the higher the number, the more of the transient it's going to be let through the compressor, which means that initial hit is going to be let through. Whereas if you have it all the way back down here, that kind of hit is going to be choked off a little bit. That's not necessarily a bad thing. If you have a really slappy kick or snare or whatever that you kind of want to reduce the transient on, you can just pull this attack back and kind of control the transient. And then release is just kind of how the compressor lets off of whatever it's compressing when it comes back below the threshold that you set. And this is totally something that you need to mess with and you need to listen to and find what you like. So what I usually start off with is a 10 millisecond attack for drum shells, and then I'll adjust after I listen. All right, now notice that when I pull this down, I pull the attack knob down to make the attack a smaller time. It's going to react faster when the transient hits. It kind of chokes off the high end. You can really hear it here. It's a pretty big deal. So I'm going to leave it here. I may come back to it to adjust later, what I want to try to do is match the transients of the kick and the snare to make them sound really consistent, so one doesn't jump out over the other. But yeah, we may come back to this depending on how the snare sounds. All right, so let's just go ahead and move on to the snare. Oh yeah, so one more thing I'm gonna do. So I'm gonna do this because the kick is a little. It's kind of lasts a little, sustains a little longer than I would like, especially for like a metal sounding kick or a rock kit. So I'm gonna throw this on here. I feel like the attack is pretty good for now, so I'm gonna pull back on the sustain, see if we can kind of make the kick a little punchier. You'll notice it kind of gets rid of that little hum after the kick hit. It just makes it a little punchy. All right, so let's go into the snare. I'm gonna throw an EQ on, and a frequency to really pay attention to here is the low end, which is around 150, 200 is usually what snare's low end is. And then the high end slap and presence is around like 8 to 10K, more or less. So I'm going to filter up to maybe like 75 hertz around here. You don't want to cut off any of the low end. So yeah, let's just have a listen one more time. I think I'm hearing a little mid-range that I don't like. Sometimes when you mic up something with the SM57, it'll be a little bit of mid-range build up around here. Totally normal, so we'll just cut that out. All right, cool. Let's go ahead and throw a compressor on there. I'll just throw the same one down. I definitely want some more presence on that snare. Definitely want it to feel more in your face a little bit, so I'm going to boost around right here. All right. And while we're at it, I'm going to do something. This is optional. I like to do this for metal mixes just to make the shells slam. But yeah, this is totally optional. I'm going to throw a clipper on here. I really like the JST clipper. Sounds really good. What I usually do for this is pull the mix down about 50%. So half what you're hearing is the signal before the clipper, and half of it is the signal with the clipper. It's something called parallel compression. And essentially it's just blending the dry signal and the wet signal. So I'm going to pull the trim down so we have a little bit of headroom, and then I'm going to start boosting this, and this is just for the kick. I'm going to get just like sounding just right. Now listen and make sure it doesn't clip, because sometimes it'll distort if you push it too hard. All right, that's pretty cool. I'm gonna bring it down to this one. I'm gonna do the same exact thing. Sweet, that sounds pretty good. Let's go on down to the toms. We'll start with tom 1. For panning, I'll usually do 50 left, 50 right for the tom 2, maybe a little more for tom 2. All right, and there's a little tom section right here, so I'm just going to use this. Throw some EQ on. And like I said with the kick, I always listen for that 125, 150 kind of boominess around here, the low mid. Usually, not low mid, it's just low. But listen for that, see if you need to cut that out. Like I said, it's in most toms. Let's check it out. All right, let's go ahead and throw a compressor on there. I'm gonna do the same thing. Start at 10. And then like I did with the other two, I'm gonna throw the clipper on there. Sounds really good with toms. Kind of smooths everything out, but it doesn't choke off the transient like a limiter would. All right, I was kind of hearing a little bit of resonance there, so I'll just cut some of that out. I think I want a little bit of attack. Now the attack, the high end for toms is going to be between, it's going to be around 4 or 5K, maybe a little bit more. We'll just have to listen. All right, now I'm definitely feeling like this kick is hitting a little too hard. So we have a few options. We can either pull the attack on the compressor down, or we can pull down the attack on the transient master. So let's try pulling down the attack on the compressor. I definitely feel the same for the tom also. Cool. Notice how that kind of tames this part right here, because this part really stands out to me, how it just kind of jumps up in volume. Let's go ahead and move on to the next part, which is the second tom. I'm just going to pull the same EQ down and clear out these little points we have. Let's listen for that low end kind of resonance we don't want, around 150. All right, there's not a lot of it. There's not really a lot. I don't really hear it changing too much, which is a good thing. So now let's focus on the high end. I definitely think it needs more high end presence. Just pull the compressor down. And then the clipper, and let's check them. All right, and notice I'm kind of going back and adjusting things as we had another instrument. Maybe I'll hear that the other tom was a little louder than I would have liked it. Now that I've had the second one, and I'll just go back and adjust it. You're going to be doing this a lot. It's good to take your time on drums to make sure everything's super solid before you move on to the next thing, which would be bass. All right, so that sounds pretty cool. Let's go on to the hi-hat. This is very easy. But something I really don't like that I hear a lot is hi-hat that has like way too much high-end presence and jumps out over instruments. I kind of like the hi-hat tucked back a little tiny bit. So I'll show you what I'll do with that. I usually have a pretty wide slope on this, and I'll usually cut it around here. There's definitely some high-end stuff. 4K is always nasty to your ear, so I'm gonna see if that's where it is. There's a little bit, but I think most of it's gonna be up here. We can just high shelf that down. I kind of hear a little bit of ringing. It's probably going to be around 2K. Cool, sounds good. I think I'm gonna pull down the attack on the snare. It's kind of slamming compared to other things now. I just add a little bit of presence on the snare and then kind of reduced the transient on that by turning down the attack. And I kind of want to add some more high end like clickiness to the kick. So let's go back and do that. It's going to be around 4 or 5K. It's usually where I like it. So I'll make a relatively small little bell. And we'll just find a little nice spot around here and we'll boost it until it sounds good. All right, cool. Move on to overheads. Now, chances are, and this goes for when you record live drums as well, because I have had these routed as if you're recording live drums. So naturally, the hi hat is going to be very loud in the overhead track. So a lot of times I won't even use this, but we've mixed it anyway. If it's just really loud, we'll just mute this or turn it down, but we'll have to see. All right, so let's enable the overheads. I'm gonna go ahead and just mute everything because I just wanna listen to the overheads by themselves. All right, cool. So there's definitely some bleed in there. I have adjusted something. So when you record live drums, the loudest thing in the overheads is always going to be the snare. And there's a trick you can do where you throw a limiter on the overheads. I'm going to turn this down so it's not super loud. And what you can do is you'll turn up the gain or the input or whatever until it's only compressing when the snare is hitting. So it's gonna compress or limit the snare out of the overhead tracks for the most part. It makes a huge deal. So you won't be hearing it bust through on the overhead. All right, so let's just do that. I'm gonna limit them a little bit anyway. All right, cool. So now we've done that. Go ahead, and I treat these very similar to the overheads. I mean, to the hi-hat, excuse me. So I'm gonna filter them up here. Now let's listen to something. Let's switch the limiter over here, see if that makes much of a difference. Makes a very small difference, I think. So I'll just leave that there. Cool, I think they sound pretty good. Let's listen to them in the context of the rest of the drums. Cool, sounds good. Let's move on to China. China is very similar to the other ones as well. Oh, before I do that, actually, let's check the hi-hat, see if I need a hi-hat track or if I can just mute that. I'm just like not having it. So I'm going to leave that muted. Let's move on to the China. But China can kind of be a pain to EQ because it's just naturally a harsh sounding instrument. And when you mix, you want to get rid of harshness. So it kind of bugs you, but you're just going to have to deal with this is a harsh sounding instrument. Just get it as good as you can without taking away a lot of that harshness because that's what it's for. I noticed I think I had to pan the wrong way, so I'm going to pan it. I mean, I think that sounds cool right there for sure. It's definitely loud in the overheads, which is fine. So I'm just going to have it really low. on the direct mic. All right, so now we've got hall and room. These are where the magic happens for sure. So got some really like ambient hall sounding mics. I'll play you what they sound like. I'll notice there's not a lot of kick in there. I don't like having a lot of kick in the halls just because I like having the kick sound real direct. So it's real punchy sounding. There's not a lot of sustain on it. That's just a personal preference. You can choose to do that with my drum library. When you mix the drums, you have control over each mic. But I just chose to not have a lot of the kick going into the hall mics. But what I do with this is you can use any compressor you want, but I find this one sounds really nice. There's a preset on here that I'll use and kind of just slightly tweak. There's a few actually. So I'm going to go to drums on this, and I'm going to go clean open drum room. And essentially what this is doing, this is just having it's compressing really hard and it's saturating the drums. This is definitely something that is okay to overcompress. In fact, I like how it sounds overcompressed. What this kind of is, I think of this as a more realistic sounding reverb. It definitely gives life to the drums. And this, if you do this correctly, this will just take your drum mixes to the next level. So let's listen and find some really punchy sounding hall sounds, and then we'll blend them in. All right, so that's not really in your face and driving. This sounds promising. All right, so what I just did is I turned up the clip gain, which is the gain before the plugin starts. So I want a little bit more gain reduction. I have the compress knob turned all the way up. So it's just compressing a little more essentially. So I want this junk slamming. It sounds really good right now. All right, cool. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna blend this in to the other drums. What I like to do is I like to turn it all the way down, and then we'll play without it, and then we'll blend it in, and then we may place an EQ after it to cut some frequencies if it just kind of adds something that you don't like. All right, cool. That sounds pretty good. I'm definitely hearing some overheads come through, and they're a little louder than I would like them to. So you have a few choices. You can either get an EQ and cut them out, but I don't want to take away from the snares. I really like the snare punching through, so I'm just going to turn the overheads down a little tiny bit. Cool, that sounds pretty good. Sounds pretty good. Let's move on to the rooms, and this is pretty much, I'll do the same exact thing. I'll just bring down, oh yeah, this is a mono, so I'll have to just insert it again. There it is. And I'll listen to this one, and I'll do the same thing, because, I mean, another preset or another setting might sound better on the room than it did on the halls. I think that sounds pretty good. And when we recorded these drums anyway, I have the room slamming, so it's already pretty distorted. So that sounds fine to me. Let's just add it to the mix now. And this is another thing that's optional, the room. A lot of people don't use mono room mics, but why not? Just kind of give some more body to the snare. I really like that a lot, actually. All right, so everything's going through this drum bus right here. What I usually do is just maybe throw a compressor. I really like the SSL compressor. It sounds amazing. I want something really subtle because I don't want to change what I've done too much. So maybe have this on auto, or this stage, man, this is really subjective. I don't like to smash things too much here, but you totally can as long as it sounds good. Cool, sounds good. Sounds real good. All right. Next, I like to throw a reverb on the snare and toms. I found one I really like. It's in Waves. It's at Abbey Road plates. And what I'll do is I will load up the Warm Drum Cave preset, and I'll turn down the damper all the way so that the decay is really short. But we'll adjust it in a second. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get that snare, and I'm going to send it to the drum verb. All right, so essentially what I've done is I've just done a copy of everything on this track, post plugins, post fader. It's going to this track right here. So we'll hear it when I turn this knob up, we'll hear reverb. Cool, I think that sounds pretty good. In the context of a mix, you're not going to really be able to hear that. So I like to mix them a little louder than I normally would by themselves. But like I said, when you put it in context of the rest of the mix, it'll sound pretty awesome. All right, cool. Sounds pretty good. Last thing I would say you can do is listen back one last time all the way through and listen for inconsistencies. What I mean by that is maybe there's a section, maybe the chorus, you want the snare to be a little louder. Then you just open the automation lane and whatever DAW you're using, say this is the chorus right here, and you highlight that and you just turn it up a little bit. It totally is up to you. Find some things that you don't like. Maybe you wish the kick wasn't as loud on the chorus or wasn't as loud on a breakdown or whatever, and you just fine tune things to your liking, and then once you're really happy with how your drums sound, move on to the next step, which is bass.